Thanks for having us, everybody. I'm excited to be here, and yeah, there's been some really great presentations, and I'm excited to be a part of this. Um, we were asked to talk about one of our big partnership projects that we've had in Utah, called the Miller Creek Watershed Restoration. You can see this is just a small part of the team that we've been associated with, and it's been a great run. This partnership started after the 2012 Sealy fire. It burned over 48,000 acres on the Manti La Salle National Forest, and we saw downstream impacts from post-fire flooding events. So the three topics that we would like to kind of portray here is the partnerships, implementation, and outcomes. We feel like these three topics are what made this project successful. And personally, I feel like they're listed in the order of importance. Partnerships came first, and I don't think we would have got anywhere without partnerships. Some of the partnerships that were developed through this project were early on. I myself was a part of the Forest Service's bear team, but I've also participated in ESR teams. So I have been involved in post-fire. I mean, I'm out red carded with these teams as these fires are wrapping up, so I can see the impacts on the ground, and I can help these teams, with wildlife resource questions. In Utah, we have kind of a special program, WRI, or Utah's Watershed Restoration Initiative, and it has a special fund for fire rehabilitation. The Utah legislature has put a priority on fire rehab projects, and so that's a tool that we use to help with some of these restoration efforts. Nonprofits, NGOs were huge in helping us get to where we needed to be. And that's why Jordan's helping co-present. Jordan was such a big help, and there's no way these projects could have been done without his knowledge, without his help, without all the things that he brought to the table. Other agency resource specialists. I mean, a lot of the Miller Creek project was done on private lands, but we brought in resource specialists from the Forest Service and BLM, and they helped give us guidance on these projects to make sure that we were getting them done to meet more than just wildlife needs, but just to meet ecological needs. We also used industry. Here in the area that we're in, we had oil and gas companies that have operations in this vicinity, and so they helped with restoration efforts through providing labor, providing materials, providing funding. So local industry also helped with these restoration efforts. And then, like I said, a lot of this was done on private lands, and we had one landowner that was interested, which he talked to his neighbors, and the word got out, and this project really grew from just a little bit to a really big project. I feel like another part of this restoration effort was, identifying, the goals of the partnership. And I think it's important for people to think about when they're going into restoration efforts. What are the needs of their agency organization, but also what are the needs of the other agency organizations that you'll be partnering with? And how do you find that middle ground? I mean, our objectives are all going to be different, but where do they all overlap, and where can we find these common ground to make these projects really, really successful? So I'll just kind of start going into what happened with our restoration efforts. So like I said, the Sealy fire burned in 2012. I was a part of the bear team that assessed the impacts from the fire. One of the efforts that we decided would be something worth doing is seeding some annual sterile annuals. So I can't remember exactly what we used. I think it might have been a sterile triticale. So we used that to try to break up some of the hydrophobic soils and try to create a little bit of, soil stabilization. We also did some mulching of trees in the area. Some other fires that I've worked on, we've used straw bales. A lot of what we found from these efforts is we seeded the sterile triticale late into the fall of 2012. There was a little bit of snow on the ground when we put the seed down. So in the spring, when it started to germinate, we could see the roots, but they never actually got contact with the soil, so those plants did not persist. So that was a live and learn. We prioritized the areas where we seeded. So, I mean, this was 48,000 acres. We weren't going to seed every inch of that. So we prioritized slopes that were 30% or less because we thought we might actually get establishment of our plants. And then we also prioritized high severity burn areas because we knew that we would find hydrophobic soils there. Our results were kind of hit and miss. We did have some success, some failure, but it was I think it was good for the community to see us doing some things. We learned a lot from it. I also think that participants, on the bear team, they kept in contact, so they also learned from it. So I think these were some important efforts. We've done fire rehab on other areas, other fires, especially areas where we have weedy annuals. In Utah, cheatgrass is kind of an issue. We've seen that our seeding efforts have really helped us combat cheatgrass establishment. So that was I think identifying in your area what you're up against and what resources are at risk really kind of dictate if you should seed or do mulching. But these bear teams that I've worked with, because I've worked with a few of them, they're exceptional and they really understand what works, what doesn't, and they try to keep in contact so that they can live and learn from your efforts. So this was kind of what we started doing in 2012. Then we knew that there was going to be some high flow events afterwards, and we did see high flow events. In 2016, we started small scale stream restoration on Miller Creek. We had seen impacts you can see in the picture to the far right. We had some really deeply incised channels. One thing I might note is we did see really, really deep cuts after some of these high flow events, but it wasn't only the fire. These systems were degraded by other items. I always tell everybody it was death by 1,000 cuts, and the high flows after the fire was just the final blow. So in 2016, a small group of us, we were interested in trying out some of these PBR, process-based restoration techniques. So we started using what are called low-tech structures, or beaver dam analog structures. You can see in that far right picture, we're pounding posts into the channel. They're kind of offset so that you can weave materials in between. We used local material. We used juniper boughs to weave in that to kind of back up water behind it, allow the water to slow and to catch that sediment and filter it out to try to agrade the channel. We were out there installing these in the spring of 2016. I think it was March. Immediately after, we had some really big flood events. You can see in that middle picture, that's basically the same structure. And we had, it blew out, but if you look behind it, we actually caught a bunch of sediment and aggraded the stream channel. We also created some complexity in the stream. Now it's meandering a little bit. So our failure was a success too. And I'll tell you this much. So we installed these in March of 2016, it was probably not even 2 weeks after, we had some really big rainstorms, and I was driving down the highway below where these are, and you cross this stream on the highway, and it was just ripping. I was like, oh no, there goes all of our hard work. When we went back up, yeah, some of them had blown out, but a lot of them had completely filled with sediment. And by August of that year, almost all of our low-tech structures had graded and filled with sediment. So you can see that far left picture shows, you can see the low-tech structure kind of there in the middle of the picture, but it is graded and deposited sediment all around. And then from here, I'm going to kick it over to Jordan.
So Nicole explained just briefly about the Utah Watershed Restoration Initiative. I want to kind of go into that a little bit more because it was really key in funding all the work that we did. Utah Watershed Restoration Initiative is kind of a contributed fund of where the state brings in some federal money, some state general fund, conservation dollars. There's a lot of different sources that go into it, and then we can employ that on the ground. It's several $1 million a year, and we were able to. In 2017, we were kind of at a transition point with the program where they were looking to. Up to that point, it was just kind of one-off projects, but they were looking to see projects that were bigger, that were more watershed scale. We knew that. We wanted to be able to tap into that pot of funding. So as a group of restoration practitioners, we got together, identified projects that we all wanted to work on, looked for things that were adjacent, and put them together in a single proposal into kind of a super project. And it worked really well. We were one of the highest scoring projects in the state for several years in a row, and we were able to build a coalition of partners like Nicole was talking about, and that made the project really strong. So we secured the funding. One of our partners, another NGO, Sageland Collaborative, was really interested in putting in some monitoring time and effort with a new kind of habitat monitoring protocol that we developed here in Utah called the Rapid Stream and Riparian Assessment. So they got out on the ground and started doing some of that before we started into our restoration, so we could have a baseline. We secured funding in 2017. We went to work in 2018. We planned 3 types of restoration activities on the landowner just above where we had built BDAs in 2016. So the first one were large durable structures. So that picture on the left, you'll see a track hoe putting in a kind of a step down log structure. We put those in places where we just wanted to hold the grade of the stream. We also put in process-based low-tech structures like BDAs, post-assisted log structures. We did those in places where we thought we could reasonably grade the stream bed. And then we also did strategic felling with with a contract crew, a contract logging crew, just to knock debris into the stream where it was deeply incised, and we didn't think the other methods would work very well. So you can see that inset on the right of the screen. That's a deep cut into Miller Creek. There were spots that were even deeper than that on the upper stretch, like probably 30 feet deep. So we started working with that highest up landowner. The idea was to work from top to bottom and try and capture sediment as we went down. We had a verbal agreement with that landowner to keep cattle out of the area, so it could have some time for vegetation to grow back in on our restoration efforts. We started a pattern of yearly restoration where we did structures in the fall, and then we would come back and do planting the next spring. So on this phase of it in 2018, we built 42 beaver dam analogs in this stretch. We built 10 hardened structures, Some of them are Rosgan style structures. Some of them were just kind of like check dams where we're trying to hold the grade. And then we put in the next spring, we went back, we put in 2,500 plants that were in containers and several thousand willow pole cuttings. So things that we learned with this 2018 phase. One, that contract crew was amazing. We contracted them for 2 weeks worth of work. Within a week, they did all of the felling that we felt like we needed for the project. They wanted to keep working, put in the hours that they had committed to, and so we taught them how to build beaver dam analogs. Well, one of the best moves that we made on this project, because we continued to use them like that, and I'll show you in some future slides here. Some landowners may need a written agreement. We just had a verbal agreement with this landowner, and we found out later that he was just letting his cattle run rampant in the restoration area, and it was really hard on all of our plantings. And third, we involved help from ConocoPhillips because they were a downstream landowner. It was really cool to be able to get industry involved in this restoration work, even though it wasn't on their own property. So we move forward, continuing phases in 2019, 2020. We went back downstream to the landowner that we had originally worked with, and we started to build more BDAs. We left out the hardened structures. We felt like that wasn't appropriate for that area, but we were building beaver dam analogs, and in 2019, we built a bigger partnership, started bringing in more people, which meant more volunteers to help us plant. And that revegetation work became kind of paramount to kind of the capstone to every phase of the project. What we saw is landowners downstream saw the benefit of what we were doing in capturing sediment and reaggrading the stream bed to the floodplain, and they started asking us if we could come and work with them. So we have several future phases where we can continue to do this. Some of the things that we learned, one, some landowners are better to work with than others. The landowner that just the next landowner downstream where we're working in this 2019 phase was amazing. He wanted to take care of it. He wanted his property to look good. He wanted to make sure that the damage from the fire was fixed and it was permanent. We used that contract crew from the year before to build BDAs. This first phase of it, we also paired them with a Conservation Corps crew. So we had 5 contractors and 5 Conservation Corps crew on the ground for a little over a week. And between that crew, that 10-person crew, they built 96 BDAs in just over a week in about a mile's worth of stream. So that spread the water out. We saw monsoon flows fill BDAs in just as we had in 2016, spread the water out. And we actually saw some natural revegetation come back in over our 2016 structures and over this restoration area. We still continued with the planting. You can see one of our partners carrying a big flat of container plants. And it just went better and better. In 2020, we did another 80 plus structures, and our structures became more sophisticated. The further we moved downstream, we learned more about how to do this. In that small inset on the left, you'll see what we call a post-assisted log structure. So we had a large log, we embedded it in the stream bed, keyed it into the banks, and then secured it using posts and pounding posts into the bed. And as we moved further down, and we found that we were getting more and more on top of bedrock, and it was harder to get posts in, these kind of structures worked really well. That contract crew, without us really having to give them direction, started using rock structures too, and hand building rock structures, similar to like one rock dams, like the Z-Dike methodology of restoration. And all of it was working really great. Learned a lot. Partnership continued to build. This became kind of a flagship project for the Utah Watershed Restoration Initiative, and kind of a model for building a large project. So Nicole mentioned that we were doing a lot of work upland too. We're focusing on the stream for this presentation, but there was a lot of juniper and pinion removal on the uplands and trying to improve water quality and water quantity in the stream during the times when the stream gets low. So a lot of positive things going on there. Because this became kind of a flagship project for Utah Watershed Restoration Initiative, we started doing a lot more outreach. There were Instagram posts, videos, podcasts. We did a lot of stuff. So we, rather than try and incorporate all of that into this presentation because it would take too long, I think this presentation will be made available to you all. We put QR codes here on this slide. You can go and look at some of the videos that we've done with landowners explaining why this is important to them, why it's important to us as restoration practitioners and biologists. A lot of good media. Really became kind of an easy one to do good, positive media around. Oops. So Nicole mentioned that sometimes our failures are successes too. On the left there, you'll see where we had BDAs that were starting to accrue deposited sediment behind them. In this past summer, we had about a week where we had a really strong monsoon flow come through Utah. It dumped water 3 different times. Nicole and I went out and we found spots where water had come up about 15 feet high on the bank. So huge flows that spilled way out over the floodplain. And we lost a lot of our BDAs. Nicole sent me a video during one of the storms of a bunch of our posts floating downstream, several miles downstream. The nearest we can tell is the first 2 storms that came through, our BDAs held really well. And then the third one is when they gave out. But BDAs and these process-based techniques are designed to fail. We don't want them to last forever. So you see on the left, it says April 2021. That's the stream trying to rebuild itself. But by August, after those monsoon rainstorms had come through, so much sediment had come down and it had filled it in and had reconnected the floodplain. The stream bed itself still needs some help. You know, that water needs to flow over it and kind of reshape and add in some habitat diversity. And we plan to go back in and help that with some restoration work, but it failed perfectly. It reshaped the valley bottom in a way that it gives us some huge advantages as far as creating habitat in the future and being able to plant and secure the stream banks where they're at. So some of the monitoring outcomes we wanted to show that Sageland Collaborative was doing with the rapid stream and riparian assessment. In almost every area, after we put in these structures, we saw an increase in a positive increase in these several different metrics. So water quality, hydrogeomorphology, fish and aquatic habitat, riparian vegetation, and terrestrial wildlife habitat. We did see some decreases in a few of them. That's mostly because they did assessments after that monsoon. And so some of the complexity in the habitat for fish went down. We did see a general downward trend for terrestrial wildlife habitat, but in conjunction with that, we see the upward trend of riparian vegetation. So they're conversely related. Or inversely related. In 2021, we decided, so it was fishless. Miller Creek was fishless because of the fire, or it might have been fishless because of all the activity before that had degraded the stream. We didn't have good records of that, but we had a plan. We felt like the habitat was back well enough that we could go and put fish in. So we went and we seined fish out of the San Rafael River, transported them up to Miller Creek and stocked speckled dace back into Miller Creek. We had a plan to put Colorado River cutthroat back in during the fall, but post monsoon, the changes made it so that we need to do a little bit more work before we can get the Colorado River cutthroat in there. That kind of wraps that up, but we do want to point out that the partnership was really important here. These are the key partners. This isn't every partner, but these are the key partners that were working with us in restoration on stream bed or in the upland. So we had several landowners, which they don't have a logo, but we did work with Fish and Wildlife Service partners for Fish and Wildlife Program. Of course, Division of Wildlife and Trout Unlimited, National Wild Turkey Federation, Sageland Collaborative, BLM, Utah Department of Ag and Food, and the Forest Service. All key partners in making this work and experimenting with new and emerging techniques. And in the end, we felt like we came out with a pretty good product for post-fire rehab.